Welcome to Tied to the Moon, the ever-evolving podcast of stories and reflections on life and living connected to nature. My name's Kate Lawrence and I am your host. This episode is coming out on the new moon of 30th of May at 9:30 p.m. And this lunar cycle will include the Winter Solstice on June the 21st. Or if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the Summer Solstice. And I've decided to do a trinity of connected episodes for this month. The series of 3 is about and tells the story of Joan of Arc, or a version of this well-known story that I crafted and performed a few years ago. The theme that I explore through the story of Joan of Arc is that of faith. The winter solstice is a time of descent and darkness. And in ancient times, faith was relied upon to believe that the sun and the light would return from the nadir of night, that is, the shortest day of the year. In this first episode, I'll introduce the context and how I came to tell this story, and we'll hear the first part of the story of Joan of Arc. In the next episode, which will come out on the full moon a week before the solstice, I'll finish telling the story of Joan of Arc. And then in the third episode, which will be on the new moon, I'll share some thoughts and reflections on the story, the impact it's had on me, and why I continue to be drawn back to the story of Joan of Arc. So here goes with part 1. Before I declared myself to be an audio producer, I was an oral storyteller. I've crafted and told countless stories in front of audiences, ranging from folk tales to personal stories and much that's in between. And the pinnacle of my years solely focused on in-person oral storytelling was a show I developed called Fantastic Feminist Folktales. It was a collection of 5 or 6 stories, most of them folktales, that I adapted or recrafted, all with strong female protagonists, and all of them with messages that deeply resonated with my values. Given that I love all of those stories that I told, I'll no doubt sneak them into this podcast at some point or other. But for now, I want to talk about the only true story in the performance. When the idea of creating a show as a collection of folk tales with strong female characters came, I already had a number of shorter folk tales I'd crafted, and I knew they'd be perfect. For sure, I was going to tighten and polish them for a proper show, but I wanted a new story for the creative challenge of it, and because I didn't have enough material, and I wanted to try my hand at a historical story, a true story. And I had an idea that a story from the time of the witch hunts would be perfect, because this period of history is the hard edge of institutional violence against women, and the impact still reverberates down the centuries. I expected to find stories of pagans, women who still held reverence for the old ways, the healers and herbalists, the midwives, the witches. And then I had a chat with my good storytelling friend Jackie, and she suggested a few people, including Joan of Arc. Now, all I knew of Joan of Arc was a very vague memory from primary school of her riding a horse ahead of an army. And maybe she was naked too? Turns out this last bit is actually from Lady Godiva, who rode through the streets naked to protest the tax her husband had imposed on his tenants. Back to Joan of Arc. I did a bit of cursory research and it told me that Joan was burnt at the stake. So far, so good. But as I read on, I was so disappointed to find that she was deeply Christian, killed by the church, and 500 years later made a saint by that same church. Damn, no pagan proselytizing to be had with this story. But there's something about faith that I revere and draw upon in my own life that I know is not held in monopoly by religions and churches. I was intrigued enough to stay open and respect her faith, and pragmatic enough. Her story was already well known and well told, and I'd be able to lean on the work of all those people before me to craft the story. So, as they say, without further ado, here is part 1 of the story of Joan of Arc. I was 13 when I first heard a voice from God for my help and guidance. When I first heard the voice, I was frightened. I was in the garden, it was high summer, and the voice came from the right, from the church. By the time I was 17, 2 to 3 times a week, the voice would say to me, "You must go to France, you must go to France, you must lay the siege at Orleans, you must go to Robert de Baudricourt at Vaucouleurs, he will arrange safe passage for you." So said Joan of Arc in 1431 at her trial for witchcraft and heresy. She was 19 years old, and she's referring to a time 2 years earlier when she was 17 years old. At that time, France was in its darkest hour. For 75 years, the English had been invading the country, seeking to conquer it and claim the French crown. For the last 20 years, the French themselves had disintegrated into civil war. There were the Burgundians, who aligned with the English, led by the Duke of Burgundy, and there were the Armagnacs, led by the Duke of Orleans. The French royal family itself had splintered. In 1420, when Joan was 9, the Queen of France had signed the Treaty of Troyes with the English. And under that treaty, her daughter would marry the King of England, and their heir would inherit both the French and the English crowns. That same treaty disinherited the Queen's son, Charles, and he was with the Armagnacs. Now, France is geographically divided across the middle in a great arc by the river Loire. And at the time Joan is 17, most of the territory north of the River Loire, including Paris, is held by the English and the Burgundians. And most of the territory south of the River Loire is held by the Armagnacs. And Charles, who is also known as the Dauphin, has his royal court south of the river at Chinon. A few months before Joan's 17th birthday, the English lay siege to the city of Orleans. Orleans sits on the River Loire at the most northern point of that arc. And the thinking is that if Orleans falls to the English, the gateway to an invasion of the south of France would lay open. Charles the Dauphin is like a rat in a trap. He's considering moving his court further south, maybe even going into exile. His coffers are empty and his soldiers are completely demoralized. They have been beaten time and time again. Now, Joan comes from a tiny village called Domremy that sits up in the far northeast of France, in a pocket of Armagnac territory completely surrounded by Burgundian territory. And in her home village, she's considered good and kind, charming, maybe charismatic, but boringly pious. But she conceals a steely determination, a strong and resolute voice, a clearly focused eye, and an unshakable faith in her God, her mission, and her role. And so at 17, she sets off, heading to the nearest town where there is a captain, which is Vaucouleurs, and there she seeks an audience with Robert de Baudricourt to convince him to support her mission. And her mission, as guided by the voices she hears from God, is to see France rid of the English and to have Charles crowned the rightful king of France. Robert de Baudricourt meets her and says, "Take that woman back to her father and tell him to have her beaten." Joan does not return to her father to be beaten, and a few days later she comes back to de Baudricourt. By this stage, though, because of the clarity of her vision and her strength of character, she's starting to garner support in Vaucouleurs, and 6 men say they will go with her on the long trek to Chinon, to the royal court. And so eventually Robert de Baudricourt is persuaded to support her mission to attend the royal court. Joan's hair is cut short, she dons men's clothing, she learns to ride a horse, and then her and 6 armed men she's just met set off on the 500-kilometre trek across mostly enemy territory. It's a miracle in itself that they make it, but they finally arrive at the royal court of Charles the Dauphin in Chinon. Now, at the royal court, they know this girl is on her way. Their only question is she divinely guided, or is she a dupe of the devil? So they meet her, and they can't tell. So Charles decides to send her further south to Poitiers, where all the religious clergy, the theologians, the learned men are gathered. And there they check her virginity, of course. It's already been checked in Chinon, and it will be checked many times in the short course of her public life. And for 3 weeks she is interrogated, and they find that she's good and pious, and that there's no sign of evil in her. But they want a sign from God to show that she is truly guided by him. And so they decide to set a test, and the test is that she will be allowed to lead a siege at Orleans. And so she goes back to Chinon, and over a number of weeks she's fitted for her own armour, and she has a banner made, a banner that she will carry at the head of the army as they go into battle. It's a big white banner, and she has the words Jesus Maria painted at the top. And there's a picture of Jesus, and there's 2 angels, one behind each of his shoulders, and he's sitting in judgment on the world. And Joan chooses a symbol for herself, and she chooses the fleur de lis, the French flower, and has that painted on the banner. And then she spends the next few weeks learning to walk with the weight of the armour and learning to ride with it, and learning to ride with the weight of the armour and carrying the banner. And then her and the army head off to Orleans. Now, Orleans was under siege by the English and the Burgundians, but they didn't have enough troops to fully surround the walled town. So it's fairly easy for Joan to get into Orleans, and she arrives there with supplies and 6 of her entourage. But for some confusion of reasons, the army stay on the other side of the river, and after Joan goes into the town, they about face and head back to the last staging ground where they'd spent the previous night. So Joan arrives into Orleans to a hero's welcome. They line the streets to catch a glimpse of the woman sent by God, sent by Charles, their rightful king, to save Orleans. They reach their hands out to touch her, and she is ready to fight. But the leaders of Orleans say, "It's great that you're here, very grateful. You've raised our spirits and you've brought us food. We were hungry. But you've only come with 6 more soldiers, and so we're not in a much better position than we were before you arrived." And Joan says, "I have been sent here on a mission from God. I've been sent by the Dauphin, the rightful king of France. I need an army. Send for the army. How can I do God's will without an army?" So they sent for the army. While she's waiting, she decides to send a letter to the English. It will be wrapped around an arrow and fired across the river to where they are. She doesn't write it because she's illiterate, but she dictates it, and this is what that letter says in part. "King of England, and you, Duke of Bedford, who call yourself the regent of the kingdom of France, submit yourselves to the King of Heaven. Restore to the maid sent here by God the keys of all the fine towns that you have taken and violated in France. And if you refuse to listen, I will raise a war cry greater than France has heard in 1,000 years." The English fall about themselves laughing. This is hilarious. They send a message back saying, "You're a trollop, go back to herding cattle." But she is having none of it. She storms up to the ramparts and she bellows at them across the River Loire. "Duke of Bedford and all you Englishmen, return to your God-given country, or I, Joan the Maid, will come there and kill every last one of you without mercy." And they didn't pay her any attention at all. So the Armagnac army finally comes back to Orleans, the preparations are made, and they are ready to fight. And at the break of dawn, they head into battle, and Joan leads the charge with her banner held high, and she rallies them. "In the name of God, in the name of France, fight! Fight for your country! Fight! Fight to restore France and Orleans to God's order!" And those Armagnac forces are filled with a faith and a fighting fervour they've never felt before, and they surge forward. And the English hear her as well, and they wonder, has God deserted us? And they falter. But then late on the first day, Joan is injured in the shoulder. She lays in a ditch, and the Armagnacs become confused. They don't know what to do. They hesitate, and the English and the Burgundians seize the moment, and they push back. But then Joan stands, and she yells above the battle, "In the name of God, fight! Fight for France! Fight!" And the Armagnacs push again, and they surge, and the English forces are filled with self-doubt, and the Armagnac forces are full of courage. And within 4 days, the siege of Orleans is over. The English have retreated. Next episode, we will complete the story of Joan of Arc. Thanks for listening to Tied to the Moon. If you like this podcast, please rate and review it on iTunes or wherever you listen, and tell other people about it. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, requests, comments or feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can find the show notes and contact details at storyground.com.au. The music for this podcast is by Danya from Audio Jungle. This podcast is a production of Storyground and me, Kate Lawrence, and it's made on the traditional lands of the Gunung Willumbullock at the foot of Mount Macedon, 65 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, Australia.